The fifth chapter of the CISA is Protection of Information Technology Assets. The protection of assets is primarily the responsibility of the senior management team, and this is through the governance they place over the management of the Information Security Department. Information security management, therefore, is made up of a number of different types of controls. We automatically think of technical or logical controls, the tools and the various technologies we use today. But we also, of course, realize that in order to use a tool effectively, that tool must be surrounded with the correct policies and procedures. We can call these, of course, the managerial or administrative controls. We also have physical controls, locks, power, fire suppression, and other types of environmental and operational controls as well. All three of these work together to create an effective information security management program. So what then are the key elements of that security program? It requires the leadership, the buy-in and commitment right from the senior management team down through all the layers of management. The intention and desire of senior management, especially with regard to the protection of information assets, has to be then documented in approved policies and enforced procedures. This lets everybody know the importance of security and the importance of protection of those IT assets. We also realize that in many cases the greatest vulnerability in a security program deals with the people. Internal and external threats are almost always related to a person. And an effective security awareness and education programs to make sure that everybody in our organization is aware of the threats and risks and has the proper training to be able to do their job effectively. Probably the most important element of any security program. And security is everybody's job. We must clearly have documented organizational roles and responsibilities, that everybody knows that they are responsible for doing things and following the procedures in a safe way. Security is the implementation of many types of controls, as we'll look at in just a moment. But the implementation of a control always comes at a cost. It costs us in productivity. It costs us in the cost of maintenance, licensing, and operation of that control. And in some cases, that control can lead to other system problems and failures. So the implementation of controls should be carefully considered and justified by risk. Where we know there's a risk, we put in an effective and appropriate level of control. But we also have to ensure that all of those controls we put in place, technical, managerial, and physical, all work correctly. We need an ongoing monitoring program. We have to ensure that we are compliant with the rules and regulations and policies of the organization. And we also have to be ready when something goes wrong. One of the threats we always face is there could be an adverse event or an incident. And when there's an incident, it's important as auditors that we review, is our organization prepared, first of all, to try to prevent that incident, but at the same time also prepared so we can quickly detect and effectively respond to that incident as well. In the areas of roles and responsibilities, it is always good to have a steering committee, an information security steering committee that provides oversight. It ensures that everything within the information security program is working correctly. We have the correct leadership, we have the correct then implementation of the intent. Sometimes the problem is that if the project manager who's managing a security program has problems, they are unable to fix those. They need that oversight committee that has the authority, quite often from a very senior manager, to help to then remove any obstacles and keep things working effectively. Senior management, in the end, is responsible for our systems. As the executive, they implement the desire of the board of directors. They operate and have responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the organization. And executive management must support and be aware of the need for security that is built into our business processes. Quite often we'll have a chief information officer and sometimes even a chief information security officer. These people play a key role at the C-level, at the senior management team, to try to ensure that there's attention paid to protection of IT assets, especially when we realize that in today's world, information is often the most valuable asset an organization has. The CIO is responsible for ensuring that the information systems support then the business needs. And the Chief Information Security Officer makes sure that security is woven into or integrated into those business processes. Our various IT systems are owned by the business, not by IT. For example, our financial systems. The owner of a financial system is really the Chief Financial Officer. He or she owns the data and owns the system. As an IT department, the IT department manages or operates that system on behalf of the owner. This is especially obvious in today's cloud environment. We can see that in many cases, the systems themselves are located off-site, and yet the ownership and responsibility for those systems and the data that they contain remains with that organization that has engaged the cloud provider to provide a service for them. Each of the system owners has to ensure they also are aware of the need to ensure that their systems and their data is being secured properly. Each user has access to data, and with access comes responsibility. The users must follow the procedures and policies. They must be trained and aware of security issues and know who to call if there's a problem. Even if we deal with an external party, a business partner, a consultant or contractor, or some other person providing support services, we have to ensure that our obligation to protect our data is also then carried forward to that external party. For example, again, in the cloud. If I store my data in the cloud, it is still my responsibility to ensure that the cloud provider is going to protect my data appropriately. And IT developers need to be able to integrate security into their systems. They have to ensure that when they are doing various tasks as operations and development, that they are then following good security practices in the way then that they build and design our systems to work effectively, but also to work securely. And for us as auditors, since this is an auditing class, we have to have the expertise, the skill, the objectivity to certainly be able to ensure that all of these controls, risks, and other elements of a security program are actually working effectively. We are, in many cases, the eyes and the ears of the senior management team that can provide input to senior management on whether or not our controls are adequate and whether or not our IT department is operating effectively. An important part of protecting data is to know what to protect. And this is often done through the classification of our various information assets. Classification is usually based on two elements, the sensitivity or the criticality of information. Sensitivity really refers to those two parts of the triad that we called confidentiality and integrity. Sensitive data is data that if it was to be then disclosed, confidentiality, or if it was be improperly modified, integrity could harm an individual or an organization. That is sensitive data. Critical data is data that must be there for the business to run. It's about availability and ensuring that our systems and our data are there when required by the business. Now, the reason to classify the elements of our data that need additional protection is to ensure that we don't overprotect data that doesn't need it. Obviously, to provide security and to provide protection costs us something. We have to implement and maintain controls. And we don't want to be spending a lot of money protecting something that in the end didn't even need it. But as well, through risk management, we've identified what information does need protection. We don't want to face financial fines, liabilities, and reputational damage for not having protected something that should have been protected. And of course, we have to meet the legal requirements of today, dealing with privacy, dealing with personal health information, personally identifiable information, dealing with reporting requirements to ensure that we're behaving as a responsible corporate citizen and meeting then those legal expectations and requirements. We also have a number of good industry standards that can help us to ensure that our systems and data are properly protected. For example, we have requirements such as the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS. And PCI DSS sets out a number of good practices in how to protect and, of course, identify the data that needs protection. But one of the most important parts of this is knowing what data we have. Do we have a data dictionary? Do we have an information inventory? An inventory that lists all of the data elements we have, where they are stored, where they are used, so we can easily check to see who has access to them, and is that information properly and consistently protected on all of our systems and in all forms. Quite often we'll set out different levels or different classes of data classification. For example, in the military can use terms like secret and top secret. And the handling requirements for top secret data is quite different than for the handling requirements of secret data. So in other words, for each classification of data we have specific rules that pertain to that data classification. The responsibility for classification of information is done by the information owner. The information owner must be a senior manager, a person who has the authority then to enforce those rules we just talked about, even if the data appears in multiple departments and on multiple systems. So in other words, the information owner has to have influence perhaps over several different system owners or department heads. And an important part of protecting information is to label it according to its required level of protection. If somebody picks up a report, they should see that it clearly states, is this business private, business confidential? Is this something that needs special handling? And the important thing is that data is consistently protected. Even though it may go onto different systems and different networks, it can be used in different departments. We cannot let the culture of one department, who might be very sort of free and loose with data, allow the entire organization to be put in jeopardy because it did not protect the information it had access to appropriately. We have to enforce a consistent protection all the way across the organization. And a part of this is trying to ensure that we are not then subject to the disclosure of information through data leakage or data loss. We put in place data leakage and data loss prevention systems that are there to try to ensure that any data which is going out of the organization has been reviewed. Is this data that should have been protected, that was not permitted then to actually have been disclosed?